Hello, everyone. I'm Rachel Siegel, the Director of Strategic Programs at Illuminate. Welcome back to our monthly Crown Jewel Conversation series. Thank you for joining us today from all over the world. Illuminate is a catalyst for gender justice and social innovation. We invest in the leadership of Jewish women, social entrepreneurs who are devoting their lives to tackling society's most pressing issues affecting women and other marginalized communities around the world. We are building a global network of changemakers. Each year, we select 10 extraordinary Jewish women leaders. We call them Jewels, Jewish entrepreneurial women, executives, and leaders to take part in the collective. This cohort-paced leadership advancement program fosters connections, encourages partnerships, provides resources, as well as a curriculum tailored to meet their needs, thus maximizing their impact. Illuminate is also a philanthropic accelerator, dedicated to educating women philanthropists on intentional and strategic giving, providing opportunities to learn about emergent issues and leveraging communal dollars to make impactful investments in social change. Philanthropists of all financial capacities and levels of experience are welcome to participate, no matter where they are physically located. We believe that this integration of activism and philanthropy is essential to social change, and that greater impact can be made when philanthropists and activists intersect to form true partnership. When you support Illuminate, you not only support 40 organizations, very soon to be 50, run by phenomenal women, you are part of a movement. Together, we are advancing a deeply feminist response to social problems and challenges in order to create a bright future. Our conversation today will allow you to get to know one of the incredible women in this movement. Dr. Sara Shapiro-Plevan is the CEO and founder of the Gender Equity in Hiring Project and a member of the third cohort of the collective. Sara supports Jewish organizations as they develop a networked, collaborative culture, alignment with vision, and shift from hierarchy to flatter, networked organizational relationships. She also coaches individuals and teams on their work to create change intertwined with the continuum of relationships and connections that make up our communities and workplaces. Sara holds a doctorate of education from the William Davidson Graduate School of Education of the Jewish Theological Seminary. She is the founder of Rimonim Consulting and is receiving coaching certification with a focus on organizational and relational systems. Sara is a certified salary negotiation specialist, holds advanced career facilitation for the 21st century certification, and a certificate in diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. She serves on the boards of Fat Torah and Camp Ramah in New England and lives in New York City. If, like Sara and Illuminate, you believe in the power of relationships to catalyze and generate positive change, then you are in the right place today. After the conversation, we will open the floor for questions. Feel free to write any questions you have in the chat or hold them, and we'll give you the opportunity to ask later on. For now, we've muted everyone in order to avoid background noise. As I said earlier, we encourage you to turn your camera on, even if you're eating your breakfast or lunch or snack. Feel free to eat while you listen. Now I'm pleased to turn things over to our president, Rachel Weinstein.
Thank you, Rachel, and happy almost Passover, everyone. Sara, so thrilled to be in conversation with you, my neighbor. I was almost thinking we should have sat together in our living room, one of our living rooms, but so excited to hear about you and learn more about your work. And we always like to start these places at the beginning, wherever that beginning is for you. So what brought you to this work, and how did the Gender Equity in Hiring Project come to be?
It is such a pleasure to be here. I mean, really, like, I'm right across the street from you, and it's next time we'll do this together in a shared space. Rachel, thank you so much for having me. and to Rachel and Eva and Stephanie and Melissa and the whole Illuminate team, and to the board. It's a delight to be here. A wonderful break from making the transition from our narrowest places to liberation right before Passover. So it's a real treat to take this break and be here together. So how did the Gender Equity and Hiring Project come to be? I would say that it's a quick and easy story, but it actually, I would say it's really more convoluted than I ever thought that it might be in the retelling. I'm a child of the Jewish community. I've never worked anywhere else unless you count a very short stint as a cashier and burrito wrapper at Taco Bell when I was in high school. And a college gig working in interlibrary loan in the basement of the college library. But very, very early on, I discovered that my pay was actually inequitable, that the boys who asked for more money as camp counselors made more money because they asked. I mean, we were making pennies per hour, but still. That when I taught in Hebrew school, when I was a junior and a senior in college, that, the people who said that they were planning to go to rabbinical school got a bump in their salaries. Those experiences built up over time, and I held them. I was really the target of endless microaggressions, not me personally, but just in the background, in the Jewish community, in the workplace, simply because of my personal choices. As a young married person, I was challenged by my employer fairly frequently about holding my family's health insurance, because that was my husband's responsibility. I was told pretty much every time I negotiated a salary that actually my father should be providing for me or my husband should be providing for me. My hair was critiqued. It's going to be impossible for me to get a job with curly hair like a Jewish girl. My body was critiqued. I'm a fat white woman. I was told to cover my body, always dress appropriately. And then, of course, when I had a kid, I was asked why I didn't want to stay home with my kid. I was very lucky. I had 3 months of parental leave. But I was also asked how I could spend my time with other people's children and not my own. So over time, those sort of, generous, to call them microaggressions, many of them were macroaggressions. Really, I came to understand that every time I tried to advance my career, I just came up against these obstacles in human form that had nothing to do with my credentials, nothing to do with my skills, my expertise, my degrees, and had exclusively to do with other folks' biases about what women in the workplace look like, sound like, act like, and what they do, what they should behave like. Women, other people's daughters, mothers, sisters. I've spent, again, all my career, aside from those two examples, working in Jewish spaces, dominated by women, right? And where men are often in leadership positions or in the C-suite. And those microaggressions, right, implicit biases, outright aggressions, whatever they are even often perpetuated by women. And I just want to note, right, it's not just men. And those kinds of biases are showing up across Jewish communal workplaces. So I didn't just want to kvetch about it. That would be very easy. I didn't just want to, notice it and walk away, but I wanted to deal with it in a way that was constructive, and I needed to learn how. So I will just comment on the shift that took place for me. And this is where I have the pleasure of crediting so many of you who are in the room. A real shift for me actually came about one evening, January 2018. And I credit the Jewish Women's Foundation of New York, now Illuminate, as really the catalyst. As the Me Too movement and Time's Up really were, should we say, gaining traction, gaining strength, the Jewish community really joined into that conversation. And the Jewish Women's Foundation of New York at the time took the bold step to host an evening of storytelling, coming together as a community to offer really support and do the hard work of listening. This was based on some of the work I think that was done in like the London theatrical community around Me Too issues. And Jamie Allen Black and your team really took this amazing trailblazing step that changed the work that was being done in the gender space in the Jewish community. This was a really radical step forward that actually initiated conversations around gender justice in the Jewish community that had not actually been able to come to fruition before. I already was aware that you all had been doing work in partnership with Naomi Eisenberger from the Good People Fund, which I think started at some point after the Weinstein story broke. But I know that Jamie and your team really created something stunning, something that was experiential and about storytelling in a way that really was interactive and helped people to change the dialogue around what sexual and gender harassment looked like in the workplace. And it was followed by a panel of incredibly wise women who really represented the most important feminist voices in our community, including Barbara Dobkin. I remember that the room was overstuffed. It was like 1,000,000 degrees. There were like 500 people there, and it really put JWFNY on the map as an activist, really as a sort of space for gender justice and working through a gender lens in this area of social innovation. And what changed for me and where the Gender Equity and Hiring Project really was born was that I walked out of that room and asked myself, what was next? What's next? Here we heard stories, but what will we do with those stories? Telling our stories are really powerful. We can't start without listening and without telling those stories and sharing our whys, sharing what motivates us, sharing what hurts. This is what catalyzes us to make change. So I was stuck in those questions afterward. What can we do to make change as a result? So I left that space and I was actually not comforted, but I was angry. It wasn't the pile of slights and insults and what I didn't actually know at that time was gender harassment that I finally understood. But it was something in that collective storytelling that evening that was so bold. I realized that unless we took some kind of really concrete action, we would only move slowly toward something that would be indicative of substantive change. In that frustration, in that anger, I knew that I needed to find the folks who were the coalition of the willing, whoever was out there in our Jewish communal workplaces who might actually be willing to gather together, to work, to notice, to change, to begin to move our policies and our procedures and our practices toward equity. And that was really the seed of what became the Gender Equity and Hiring Project. So thank you.
Thank you for sharing that, because I'm not sure if I actually knew that that was the impetus. I mean, we are so incredibly proud of that event and the many things that came out of it, and the Safety, Respect, Equity Coalition, we got the attention of many people who were doers and donors, which is the space where we like to live in. How can we galvanize the doers and the donors into action? And that event was a perfect example. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you for sharing, the vulnerability about your personal experience and how that informed your work. I think, I'm sorry you experienced that. And yet I'm sure so many of us on this call have experienced some form of that as well. So you've been spurred into action. What does the work of the Gender Equity and Hiring Project actually entail? What are you doing?
I look forward to sharing. A lot of folks think all I do is have coffee. I do drink a lot of coffee, so I don't want anyone to dispel the notion that I do drink a lot of coffee. But we actually do our work predominantly in 3 particular domains: learning, advocacy, and weaving networks. Everything that we do is anchored really in deep learning. And that's incredibly important to us because we actually can't do any of our work without learning what might make equitable hiring, equitable employment possible. We have to actually learn and then do that work so that we can teach others about implicit bias, about the state of the field, about the data that anchors our work, about how to slow down and notice what's around us, to speak up what actually makes change possible. All of this has to be grounded in research, in data, qualitative and quantitative, so that we can actually do the work grounded in particular kinds of learning. When folks are doing that learning, our work is to supplement that when they're ready to begin asking questions. Again, as I said before, we only work with the coalition of the willing. So we're not actually banging down people's doors and begging them to come. We work with folks who have begun their own journey, and that makes it possible for us to tailor learning to the kind of journey that they seek. If we actually believe that hiring and employment processes that are more gender equitable can help women and people of all genders rise to positions of leadership, we have to understand what gender equity is, right? We have to hold a really clear definition of what that is. We have to have a clear sense of language. We have to understand how our work sits in the larger ecosystem of what the Jewish community is working on and what they're not working on. And we do this primarily through our gender equity advocates. Those are folks who, as individuals embedded in larger Jewish communities and larger Jewish organizations, are doing this work, asking deep questions, doing the hard work of noticing inside their organizations, not necessarily representative of their organizations, but embedded inside, representing the diversity of Jewish communal professionals. We've run 12 cohorts now of gender equity advocates. We just wrapped our 12th, and that represents over 170 folks inside Jewish organizations who do the hard work of learning and returning to their communities so that they can be the folks who notice and speak up at any point when there are challenges around gender equity in their workplaces. In the space of advocacy, where we turn the learning and the noticing, what we do is we encourage folks to speak up. Noticing is great, but unless we turn that into the actual capacity, the courage to speak up, we've done nothing. So what we do is encourage folks really to raise their own consciousness, right? To do hard work of sort of critical reflection that leads them towards some kind of activism or advocacy. And for a lot of us, this is like really the 1 inch deep sort of brave step toward something that's next. This feels really daring, really bold. And the question is like, what does it actually take to become an advocate? You can participate in our learning. That's great. Fantastic. But what does that spur for you, right? It's speaking up. And most of that is rooted in experimentation, right? Trying out something new, trying out a new governance practice as perhaps part of our feminist governance practice working group, or folks who've come together to challenge the idea that, and this was some work that we did during the pandemic, that terminations need to happen over Zoom, right? That we can engage in ethical terminations that can support people equitably, developing consistent policies across a variety of domains. So this doesn't seem like advocacy, but it's about noticing and speaking up when something doesn't seem equitable. What we try to do is nimble. We're really working to listen to the field, to adapt, to retool. When something bubbles up, our work is to listen to the field. I often say, like, when the field asks, we listen. That doesn't mean that we shift what we're doing every single moment, but our work is really to listen where there's a question of equity and really to do our best to respond to that. One big area that we've focused on and that we're really proud of was around salary transparency, dating back to 2019. A group of folks came together and basically asked why more job postings didn't have salaries attached to them. I mean, that was really the question. I don't want to apply for this job, it doesn't have a salary attached. And, you know, as many of us might be aware, listing a salary on a job posting radically increases the chance that a person from a marginalized community might apply for that position, right? They will then be able to negotiate successfully because they know what the floor for that salary is. They'll be able to negotiate within boundaries, which then reduces wage gaps. It's a big deal. We don't want to take that for granted. And we didn't want to take it anymore, right? We don't want to punish women, people of color, people from any marginalized community who couldn't then apply for a job because they would have to beg for salary information at the outset or not know how to beg for that information. So we basically created, with this group of volunteers, folks who stepped up to do this work together, a protocol to really move through inquiring into salary range with colleagues, with folks who are sharing jobs, to encourage organizations to list salaries. And this was actually before Colorado began to require it as a part of their state law. Certainly before New York and California began to require it. And soon we'll see that actually this is part of state and local law in more and more places. I would not say that we prompted this, obviously, but certainly this was part of the ethical standards that individuals understood as their own burden, their own desire. And it was a beautiful moment of advocacy to watch these people come together to foster their capacity to advocate and facilitate the development of tools and materials that they could take into the field and share with others. The last thing I'll add to this is that really this was very much a live issue for people, and that was what drove them. And I'll comment on one other, and I know we'll have a chance to talk about this more. One other big area that we're working on right now is our open salary spreadsheet, which actually opened this past week. Also in 2019, we decided to experiment with one of those open salary spreadsheets, kind of like the Washington Post newsroom did, or a bunch of other folks did in different domains. 1% of the Jewish communal workforce participated, right? Of roughly 73 to 74,000 folks working in the Jewish community, we had 1% of those folks who participated over about a 6-week period. We made a ton of mistakes in our initial data collection, but this was an exercise in advocacy. Could we get folks to be transparent? We opened a new version of it this past week. We've had almost 275 people participate already, just in a weekend. And we actually believe very clearly, and we want to just say this out loud, that participating in the act of radical transparency this way is actually an employee-centered step toward engaging folks in conversations about money, toward engaging folks in conversation about what equity looks like in the workplace. And we know that these are not conversations that are always made easy inside Jewish organizations.
Yeah. Thank you. And thank you for doing all this work. So let's delve a little deeper. I mean, you've touched a little bit on the why this spreadsheet is needed, but who is using this? Are you, across what level of career stage, or, are we talking about C-suite? Are we talking about mid-management? Are we talking about entry level? And also, what are the results that you're seeing from this open salary transparency spreadsheet?
So I popped into Visit just before I logged on, so I could share with you really the up to the minute.
Real-time updates, love those.
Real-time updates. It's like traffic on 1010 wins, real-time updates. So the reason we did this initially, and the same premise really holds, is that we cultivate trust by sharing information, by sharing knowledge, and by sharing our challenges, by sharing the things that we struggle with, both inside our organizations and outside our organizations, our personal challenges, et cetera. And when we engage in this kind of transparency, it really enables us to be bold, take risks, do things that we wouldn't be able to do alone. And the premise of a spreadsheet like this is really to demonstrate that by sharing our data, we are enabling that transparency to be fundamental to our problem solving together in pursuit of more equitable workplaces. So we do this in part because we believe in this idea of radical transparency. And I just want to say, there is a spectrum of transparency. This does not mean, and we tend to use examples that have to do with windows. This does not mean that our windows are always open, wide open to the public, and that everybody can see everything. That does not mean also that our windows are painted black and shut to the world, right? There's a real spectrum. Every organization and every individual gets the privilege, the honor, has the responsibility of sharing what it is that they choose to share. And this is actually really important because some folks, the skeptical, fear this kind of transparency. And that's reasonable, understandable. We want to make sure that, there's a level of participation that every person can actually engage with, and that everybody can have access to it. So that it's not, folks in one particular domain who feel more comfortable using the data or sharing their data. So I want to take a step back, and when I think about who's using it, just who the Jewish communal workforce actually is. The Leading Edge Employee Experience Survey from this past year actually shared that about 2/3 of employees reported that their organizations did not understand, employees inside their organizations didn't understand how salaries and raises were determined, right? That's a lot. Folks didn't know, 2/3 of folks didn't know how salaries were determined and how raises were determined. Another almost 2/3 didn't believe that their salaries were fair compared to other folks inside their organizations. So the spreadsheet basically is just a small step to empower individuals to gather that data on their own. And then to advocate for change so that their organizations can actually build toward those kinds of internal structures. So who's participating? Right now, the folks who are participating are a wide variety of Jewish communal professionals. We see folks who are early childhood professionals, nursery school teachers, the folks who are paid the least inside our Jewish communal systems, the most poorly paid folks inside our Jewish communal systems in many instances, all the way to somebody who created a lot of waves right before the weekend. Right before Shabbat started, we heard about a development director who put their salary in, really bold, thank you, who is making an incredible salary, who deserves to be making an incredible salary, but was making over $500,000 as a development director. We have a number of folks. I got a phone call on Sunday from someone who said, I'm a CEO, I'm sharing this with a bunch of other folks. We need more people in the C-suite who are willing to share. So what we see is that there are a wide range of people participating from what I'll say is the top of the organizational ladder, although I hate to use hierarchical language, at all points in sort of the organizational structure. Our earlier spreadsheet actually only captured the lower half of organizational hierarchies. We had very few folks at the top, in part because the exercise of participating in something like this is a challenge to folks who hold power. Folks in the C-suite found this really daunting. And so in our initial iteration, this was really not something that was embraced by folks who are in positions of power, in part because it felt really, really like an expression of vulnerability. Last, I'll say that when we opened this, this past week, we made the decision that data would update immediately and that we will keep this open until the next time it needs to be revised. So what we believe is that all people should be able to access this, all folks who work inside the Jewish community. That is from every kind of person who works in a support role to everyone who works in the C-suite. Everyone should have access to this, so that while it's employee-centered, it also is there for employers. As folks are beginning to move toward salary banding and more detailed compensation philosophies inside their organizations, we want to make sure that they have access to this also, even though it's something that's employee-centered.
Yeah. That's incredible. And, hopefully game changing, really. I mean, and obviously a lot of your efforts and energy have been put into this salary transparency spreadsheet right now, but you sort of alluded to earlier that you're doing a lot of other work in terms of helping organizations with policies. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you go about doing that and what you're focused on?
Absolutely. So we are lucky to be able to do a wide variety of work across the Jewish community. We are really, really pleased to be doing a lot of immersive work in the space of negotiation, supporting groups and individuals to lift their capacity to negotiate, not to negotiate like a man, not to be bold, assertive negotiators, but to negotiate with a feminist lens, to understand that the best negotiators are compassionate, vulnerable, honest negotiators who negotiate to the best of their ability through the skills that and the habits and the passions that they bring to their work. We root all of this really very deeply in a feminist lens to make sure that the women who come through our work are able to be themselves, the best of themselves in their own negotiations, and arm them with strategy and skills to be able to do that work effectively. And we do that in groups, we do that individually, and we're really pleased with the really the outcomes of some of that work. When somebody calls you up and says, "Oh my gosh, I got a $15,000 raise," in this day and age, that is actually a really wonderful thing, and we're super proud of some of that work. We're also working right now with two different networks, a national network and a local network, on some different policy initiatives, one around pay equity, preparing organizations to develop their own individual pay equity initiatives, and the other to identify what policies are missing to make sure that they have a robust set of policies so that they can approach their work from a stance of equity. We're also working on a couple of different modules that we're hoping to roll out for the Jewish community over the course of the next year. One is an equitable hiring module, which we know that folks in other spaces have made available, but this is really fine-tuned for Jewish communal spaces. And another is a guide to equitable hiring based on, I'm super proud of this, based on a reading group that we began that is grounded in a marvelous, marvelous novel about a search process in a church, the church's search for a new pastor. So we're going to be doing some work around that, developing a hiring process, a guide to equitable hiring that is about anchoring the work in spiritual connection, in community, and what it actually means to do the work of equitable hiring through a Jewish lens. So that's just a small taste of some of the work that we're doing.
Amazing. And you talked about doing the work through a Jewish lens, but which is one of the very important lenses that we at Illuminate hold in esteem. And the other, of course, is gender. So, it sounds like a lot of, you're working with organizations writ large about policies writ large. So how does this gender piece come into play?
I'm so glad that you asked. And in part, this was something really special for me to think about. As we introduced the spreadsheet, the new version of our spreadsheet this past week, in essence, we do all of our work through a gender lens. And it's often a question that we get, right? Well, you call yourself the Gender Equity and Hiring Project, which is, by the way, a name that we will eventually change at some point. It was a great name at the beginning. We'll have a better name someday in the future. But we do all of our work through a gender lens, and we really define gender equity as fairness of treatment for people of all genders according to their respective needs, right? And this is about fairness. This isn't about equal portioning of whatever folks need. This is about fairness. This might include treatment that's different, right? But that's considered equivalent, roughly speaking, in terms of the rights or benefits or obligations or opportunities that people have. So an example that I always like to bring is around policies and particular gaps in policies. Those are issues of equity. So we want to make sure that if we're treating people according to their needs, we actually do that and we reflect on that. So if an organization has no maternity policy, that's a problem, right? But some folks think that that's just a problem for women. It's not a problem just for women. So we first want to stop and think about why. Why might an organization not have a maternity leave policy? And we want to wonder about what that looks like, why it might have come to be, what's the reality on the ground, who's involved, and to think about it together, right? One response that we often hear is that, well, nobody's needed it before. No one's ever asked for it before. No one's ever asked for leave. That is not a good reason not to have a policy, right? We don't wait for anti-discrimination policies until someone has been a victim of discrimination, right? It's too late. So when we think about these examples, right, we think also about organizations that have maternity leave policies, but that are not adequate. So like the folks who have 2-week maternity leaves, yes, that actually exists. It's terrifying. And sometimes folks will combine that with sick leave or disability leave or vacation time. None of that actually works. And the question that we want to pause around is simply to think about why, right? Why does this not work? And you hear that I'm talking about maternity leave. We have to actually move back. We have to start with a different lens. And when we think about policy, we really do bring a gender lens to our work. We think about the women who are disproportionately affected by this, but we also think about the men and non-binary folks who are disproportionately affected by this, because dads deserve parental leave to bond with their kids. Same-sex couples who are adopting babies individually or in couples, people who are adopting kids who are older, who deserve time to bond with their kids, people of all genders who want parental leave, right? But who don't have time to access the family leave, people who want to be able to care for their parents, their siblings, their kids at any point in time along a range of needs. So to move organizations toward policy, we actually have to take an expansive look at not only what's offered, but the whys behind it, and to think about how we might move towards something that's fair for everybody. This is an interesting struggle, right? This is a really, really interesting challenge because folks often think like, well, this doesn't really have to do with women. And it often doesn't. It has to do with equity across a gender spectrum. A feminist and gendered approach to caregiving writ large would really allow us to see a lot of these policies through a lens of caregiving, especially parental leave, family leave. And, we could say a lot of things about our state, local, governmental policies. I'm not going to go there because that's not my place. But this allows us at least to begin to ask questions about policies for everyone and question our assumptions about who gives care, who can access care, and who deserves care, right? To think about the biases we hold around gender in these spaces and provide that kind of care through a policy lens without some of the assumptions that we hold and the assumptions that might get in the way with that process.
Yeah. And thank you for making that distinction about, what people need based on their needs, which is where equity differs from equality. And it's an important distinction, right? So, so much of this seems like, well, yeah, like it's obvious and so Jewish in its values. So Are you getting pushback? Where are you getting pushback? Why are you getting pushback?
This is a great question to ask and hard, right? So first, I want to acknowledge that I spend a lot of time thinking about how much folks can manage. We all have a lot of cognitive overload that we're dealing with right now, and I just want to name that and to think about how that affects the work that I do and the work that other folks do. I was confronted at a point in 2020, at the beginning of the pandemic, with someone who literally said to me, "You cannot do this work right now. This isn't important. What you're doing is not important." It was hard for me to hear that. I didn't want to hear it. I disagree. And at the same time, I have to acknowledge that there is profound cognitive overload that folks are holding. So in 2018 and 2019, where we were all thinking a lot about gender, thanks in no small part to Me Too, Time's Up, other folks, and we all as well, were also holding the Black Lives Matter movement, that our Black brothers and sisters were, beginning and working toward racial justice and racial equity, that we're obligated to struggle, I'm obligated to struggle with them to make sure that their bodies, our bodies, are safe. Again, it's possible to do that work together. We want to make sure that we are treating gender justice as something that is visible and important, and that our fight for racial justice won't stop, and our fight for gender justice won't stop as well. Then, of course, there was this thing that happened in 2020 and 2021 and 2022. The pandemic really put on hold so much of the work that folks wanted to do in the area of gender justice, in part because, we were all stuck at home. What happens when women are stuck at home? Well, the first 2 years of the pandemic were termed the she session. Women literally were asked to make their homes not just places of, for family life, not just places where they were working the first shift and the second shift, but places that were their schools and their children's schools and their offices at the same time. Women of all races and all socioeconomic statuses left the workforce during the first 2 years of the pandemic more than any other time in our country's history. So this cognitive overload literally forced people to push back against our work. It was not just all of the various movements for change. It was also simply the fact that people couldn't do anything else. And I want to add in the war in Ukraine, right? The fact that levels of tension and conflict around the globe really create a level of stress that makes it hard for people to think about things outside of their own domain. I just want to note, I've been told by a lot of people and a lot of women that there is no time for this work. There are too many other issues to deal with first. And actually, I've been told by a lot of people that I should give up the work of gender justice and actually work exclusively in the domain of racial justice and racial equity. And I really appreciate that. And at the same time, as a middle-aged white woman, I really struggle with that. It is not that no one cares about gender issues in the workplace, right? That is not true. But what we know, and this is likely something that you all may have heard in other contexts, is that the Women's Philanthropy Institute measures giving to women and girls organizations. And there are about 50,000 different organizations across the United States that do work in the domain of women and girls. That represents less than 2% of all philanthropic giving in the United States, right? Less than 2% of philanthropic giving. So we care. We definitely care. But the pushback is not just cognitive, right? It's also philanthropic. It's also financial. We're not giving. we're not stepping forward, and we're not taking the steps that need to be taken with our wallets and with our hearts to make change. Our Jewish organizations, by the way, are part of that problem. We structure them in ways that are deeply hierarchical, with the, CEO up at the top who makes all of the decisions, like the daddy, like the Jewish family, all of the kids down at the bottom who don't earn a lot of money, the workplace moms in the middle, who are the middle management. This actually doesn't work. When we create Jewish organizations that actually perpetuate some of those challenges, either around organizational priorities or even around how money is allocated, we can't afford to continue working like that. We have to move towards something that's flatter, more egalitarian, more networked, so that people have a different kind of voice in the way that our work is structured, or the way that our money is allocated, and the ways in which our leadership is structured too. So that's a kind of broad picture of pushback. And the good news is that there are tons and tons of allies who are excited and passionate about working toward change. And for those of you who are listening, we are ready to be your partner, and we're ready to, make that change together.
Thank you. I'm so mindful that we're running out of time, and I have only one last question. But before we do, I wanted to first say that you're getting props in the chat about the spreadsheet, and there were a couple questions which I wanted to quickly feed into you. One was about the spreadsheet, and people are talking about how amazing it is, and how do you balance creating this as something new versus like leveraging tools that are already out there? And I don't know a lot about this, but someone specifically thinking about something like Glassdoor, and like, what are your next steps for developing this spreadsheet?
It's a great question. Glassdoor is an amazing, amazing tool. We actually recommend that folks use it for a lot of the different resources that it offers. But one of the challenging things that we really are stepping into is the value of that transparency. We are not interested in our space in indicting any employers, or for that matter, employees in the Jewish community, and critiquing folks for the ways in which their organizations are structured, for the ways in which they hire, advance, or employ people. What we want to do is inspire them from within to make change, to motivate them internally, intrinsically, to make change. We don't want to call people out. We want to call them in. And the challenge of organizations like Glassdoor, companies like Glassdoor, is that often they're named, right? There's an opportunity to name and to criticize and to speak up and to speak out. And that's challenging and troublesome. We want to work from that place of Jewish values to really not call out anyone, and to really invite people to use, the tools, and not to really move into a place of negativity, and to challenge some of the potential and the positive moves that we've made. Also, frankly, we don't want to duplicate some of the amazing resources that are already out there. We really want to work from that place of abundance, to think about who's already doing exceptional work, and to lift up the folks who are doing that exceptional work without having to duplicate the tools that they're offering. That is both from a place of being appropriately cost effective and responsible, but also from recognizing that the Jewish community does not have to do it all.
Yeah. I like that. That's so true. And here there was a long question, and I hope I will do it justice, but it really touches on what you were talking about, like during the pandemic, with the backdrop of BLM and everything else that was going on, and also recognizing how the pandemic has shifted people's ability to hire in this moment, right? Hiring, where there's an abundance of jobs out there, and how that, so how did the pandemic hurt the potential or the opportunity for equity in the intersection of, the Jewish space? Like, how did it impact the priority for intersectional equity?
It's a great question. I'm not sure that I have, and I'm Chama. I hope I'm pronouncing your name properly. I'm going back to take a look at your question. I think one of the challenges that we see is that we're starting to see this like interesting move around the kinds of workplaces that we're prioritizing, and not necessarily just the kinds of people that we're prioritizing, right? We're looking to prioritize the kinds of folks who can work in hybrid environments, the kinds of folks who can make it into our workplaces 2 to 3 days a week. And that actually may exclude a real reach for diversity in our workplaces. Or it may prioritize certain kinds of folks who may come from certain different kinds of generational spaces that then may be more diverse. What we see is that, this move toward hybrid or remote work actually is wonderful for, middle-aged folks, right? Maybe late millennials, Gen Xers, awesome. But for younger folks, that's actually not ideal. And that may actually create a space where we're prioritizing people not necessarily based on diversity, but actually some other set of criteria. I want to also think about, in reaction to this question, right? Did it hurt the potential for equity? I actually think that the pandemic actually raised up our collective awareness for what equity might look like in the workplace. But it created, I think, a sense of fear on the part of employers, right? That bringing people back into the workplace might be perceived as something that's not equitable, or that asking people to, have their cameras on might be perceived as something that is not equitable. All of these are questions that we just want to inquire into and think about through a lens of care. When we care about our employees, when we think about how to create workplaces that are imbued with that sense of care, we're doing that through a gender lens, and we're doing that through a lens of equity. That's hard, and it's really hard to shift organizations to working in that way.
Yeah.
So Chama, I don't think that I'm answering your question in precisely the way that you had hoped, but I hope giving us
we probably could have spent an hour on that one question alone.
But hopefully the spreadsheet will give us more answers, but thank you so much for addressing it.
Absolutely. And I just want to say that the spreadsheet will be made immeasurably better if we have folks from a wide variety of backgrounds, both from a wide variety of racial and ethnic backgrounds participating, and from a wide variety of generations participating. What we saw is that we had younger folks participating initially in our previous one. We're hoping to get folks who are, dare I say, over the age of 55, who are willing to share their information. So, both folks from a wide variety of socioeconomic, racial, ethnic backgrounds, but also older folks. So please feel free to share it and invite people to participate at a wide variety of different places in the employee spectrum.
Thank you, Sarah. And as our time is coming to a close, I want to ask you the question that I ask all of you at the end of these interviews. Is really just about your experience in the collective and how it's impacted your leadership. You were very kind to say how our event was the impetus for the creation, but how actually being in the collective has impacted your leadership and how you've leveraged the relationships that you've made there. I know we have a lot of our other jewels here with us today as well, which is so great.
It is a real treat to be able to be a part of a group of amazing women. And I will say that my cohort, like the other cohorts, it's a really unusual and diverse group of people. And I feel really lucky to spend time with them and learn with them. And our learning together has been really deepened by the time that we now get to spend sort of asynchronously. We started a WhatsApp chat to share resources and challenges and congratulations on folks' accomplishments. And we have also the privilege of learning with Ruth Messenger, whose wisdom and kindness are just so deep and whose generosity is just beyond compare. Most of us work for small nonprofits, right? With tiny professional teams, small budgets, few resources. And what we really come to learn from one another is about how powerful it is to be a part of a collegial community, right? To build our knowledge and have access to the tools, the resources, the capital, right? To achieve our mission and our vision efficiently and with meaningful impact. Being a part of this group of 10, and really this group of 40 and soon 50, makes it possible to weave a network of support and learning that makes it possible to express our feminist values and to amplify those values and unpack what it means to be a feminist leader. It is such a pleasure and such a gift to be a part of this circle of women and to know that that doesn't come to an end, that these are the beginning of relationships. This is the planting of a seed that will grow into a network of support that will last throughout our careers.
Well, thank you, Sarah. And I can say as president of the board, it is such a privilege to support all of you in this work. You are women who identify real problems in the world or see issues, and you don't just say, oh, what could we do about it? You do. You jump into action and you change the world. So thank you for that. We're very grateful. And with that, I welcome back Rachel Siegel to close us out here today.
Thank you so much.
Before Rachel Siegel ends us off, I just want to say a special thank you both to Rachel and to Eva, who were a part of our gender equity and hiring cohorts and who have taken what we do and bring it into the work of Illuminate. And I'm so grateful to have them both and to all of you as colleagues, and really so deeply appreciate the work that they do as a part of this professional community, lifting us up every day.
Thank you so much for that, Sarah. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your extraordinary story with us and really being a true partner in this work. Thank you, Rachel, for leading us through this conversation. We don't have to hope that things will be different when we have leaders like you to guide us. You're already making waves. So are your colleagues around the world. We truly believe that by working with you and investing in your leadership, that change will happen. We are so inspired by Sarah's leadership and extraordinary story, and we hope that you all are as well. If you've been with us before, you know we always like to share a few actions that you can take. Here are a few that you can do right now. As we spoke about, the Gender Equity and Hiring Project's open salary spreadsheet is now live. So we hope that if you're a Jewish communal professional, you'll complete it yourself and you'll share it with your colleagues. And if you are a lay leader or involved in any of these organizations, we hope that you'll encourage the Jewish communal professionals in your life to fill it out. We offered, and we'll send you more tomorrow. We offer these sessions at no cost to you, but if you find value in what we're doing, we hope that you'll consider 2 donations today. The first one is to the Gender Equity and Hiring Project to support Sarah and her incredible work, and the other is to Illuminate. If you've enjoyed our conversation today, we hope you'll join us next month on Thursday, May 4th, with Shoshana Keats-Jaskal, the co-founder and director of Choshmat Nashim in Israel. And make sure to register to join us for our gala luncheon on May 24th, both in person and online. Thank you for joining us today. We hope to see you soon and wishing you and your families a Chag Sameach, a very happy Passover. Be well, everyone.
Chag Sameach, everyone.